Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show Mindful Matters on Radio Al Ansar at 90.4 FM in Durban and 105.6 FM in Pietermaritzburg. A show that promises to provide an hour of inspiration, information and motivation with me, your host, Nazia Iram Osman. I'm very excited for today's show, for I have with me another dear friend and colleague that I'll introduce in a minute. Just a reminder though that the point of this show is to allow you a platform on which we can learn and inspire each other by sharing our stories. But due to the topic of discussion and the volume of inquiries that we already have, we will take WhatsApp messages only today. And that too we'll have to summarize. Please feel free to WhatsApp your questions, queries, feedbacks, comments, and most importantly, what else you would like to hear on the show. So the WhatsApp number is 060 904 1056. Let me repeat, 060 904 1056. We're looking forward to hearing from you soon. So today's topic is a very serious one and one that is quite sensitive, and that is the impact that divorce has on children. And I dread to say it, but how maybe unconsciously parents use their children as pawns to get back at each other. Just to give you an idea about the stats around divorce, under half of marriages in South Africa do not last 10 years. Of that, 55.6% have children under 18 years of age. Getting stats for Islamic marriages was, I think, impossible since it's not legally recognized nor registered, which comes with its own challenges, and that's a topic for another day. Divorce creates emotional turmoil for the entire family, but for children, the situation can be quite scary, confusing, and frustrating. From the onset, though, let me just clarify that we are talking about worst-case scenarios, and children also can be quite resilient. And if the parental home was already volatile or abusive, sometimes being separate can be healthier and a relief to the child. But in some cases, we observe the following. Young children often struggle to understand why they must go between two homes. They may worry that if their parents can stop loving one another, maybe one day they'll stop loving them. School-going children may worry that their divorce is their fault. They may fear that they have done something wrong, misbehaved. Teenagers may get quite angry about a divorce and the changes that it creates. They may blame one parent for the dissolution of the marriage, or they may resent both for the upheaval in the family. Divorce usually means losing daily contact with one parent, and most often it's the father. Decreased contact affects the parent-child bond, and researchers have found many children feel less close to their father after the divorce. Divorce also affects a child's relationship with the custodial parent, more often than not the mother. Primary caregivers often report higher levels of stress associated with single parenting. Studies show mothers are often less supportive and less affectionate to their children after the divorce. Additionally, research indicates that discipline becomes less consistent and less effective. And the way I make sense of this is that the role of discipline is traditionally the father's and the mother's is to nurture. So for some children, parental separation isn't the hardest part. Instead, the accompanying stresses are what makes divorce the most difficult, like changing schools, moving to a new home. Living with a single parent who feels more than a little frazzled are just a few of the additional stresses that makes the divorce so difficult for them. Financial hardships is another huge one that comes following divorce. Divorce may also increase the risk for mental health problems in children and adolescents. Regardless of age, gender, and culture, studies show children of divorced parents experience increased psychological problems. So divorce may trigger an adjustment disorder, which means it takes them a few months to get used to the issue. But studies have also found that depression and anxiety rates are higher in children from divorced parents. So other than these neurotic symptoms, some children also have acting out behavior. Specifically in teens, maybe you'll find something like they're using substances to cope, become more impulsive, struggle to concentrate, and become hyperactive. They could become defiant, disregard rules, and use a lot of aggression. All of these can affect the school results and have a huge impact on their long-term future. These are just some of the common effects that we know. Sadly, this picture can be even bleaker if parents use their children as pawns to get back at each other. And the common way that this is done is our discussion for today. And to tell us more about this is the lovely Ayesha Karim. Ayesha is an attorney of law and a family law specialist. I will leave it to her to tell you more about herself. Welcome, Ayesha, and thank you for making the time for our listeners of Mindful Matters.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Nazia, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on choosing such a difficult topic. I know that this is not something our community speaks about very openly. And so I need to commend you on choosing something that, although we are not accustomed to speaking about it, we absolutely need to speak more about this. I've been in practice for over 10 years. I started off my career working for larger corporate firms. I specialized in corporate and commercial law, which was great at the time, something I really enjoyed. About 2 years ago, I decided to venture off on my own and start my own practice. Let me just say at the beginning, my intention was not family law. I don't think anyone chooses this area of law. It's too emotional. It's too complex. I don't think it was a conscious decision. But, we plan and Allah plans, and Allah's plans are always best. What happened was, really, it was, I guess, fate, we would call it. The first few matters that landed up at my doorstep were maintenance matters. Mm-hmm. And I think being in corporate prior to being on my own, I actually wasn't aware of the huge injustices that exists within our legal system. And I only really became aware of that getting more involved in the maintenance system, in the family courts. And at the time, again, I was unsure whether these injustices were caused by the processes in court. Was it caused by our legislation and our acts not being properly implemented? Or was it the parents? Was it the divorcing parents that could not come to a proper agreement or a proper conclusion, or they could not put the best interest of the child at heart? Being a mom myself, this topic and this area of law became very important to me. And I felt that research and gaining some really important experience on the topic led me to want to specialize and want to make a difference. And so this is where your passion meets purpose, mm-hmm. so to speak. And I took it from there, and it's really, I've now become known as the family law specialist. And alhamdulillah, it's been an amazing journey. Complex, but amazing.
Right, Ayesha. Just from listening to you, I have so many questions that pop into my mind.
I'm sure.
And we will discuss that a little bit more after this quick ad break. And we'll continue to discuss the relevant topic of the effect of divorce on children. So let's just pause for a quick ad break. Welcome back to Mindful Matters with your host, Nazia Osman, and the lovely attorney, Ayesha Karim. So Ayesha, just before we went on the ad break, you were speaking about, your experience and how family law kind of was a calling. It came to you. And I was very curious to ask, who are the majority of clients that you see?
Okay, so Nazia, I am a Durban girl, born and bred. Right. As you know, Nazia and I have known each other since
many years.
Since we were very young. There's no way we could have predicted being on Al Ansar together.
I think 25 years would be.
Yes. So I'm a very much Durban girl, and Overport Durban girl, to be specific. I studied here. I went to school here. I married here. I have my children. I gave birth to them here. So, to say the least, my clients are the Muslim community. That's who I deal with on a daily basis. The thing that I find most shocking in dealing with my community is that people are just not aware of what their rights are. I suppose for me, being an attorney for so many years, I would think these things are obvious. But there's so much of misconceptions, and I'm not sure if those misconceptions are coming from people being misinformed, or is it that we have developed a culture? We have developed a culture where people are sort of so stigmatized when it comes to this particular area that nobody wants to ask, nobody wants to seek any sort of legal assistance, and that is so dangerous because we have now created a precedent in our community where people don't even know that their kids. Let's put Muslim marriages aside because it is a complex area, and inshallah, I hope in the shows to come we can perhaps discuss that in a bit more detail. But the rights of your children exist, whether or not, it's a Muslim marriage and it's recognized, and whether or not, in fact, even if we have a couple who has never been married, the rights of the child are of paramount importance, and the courts will exercise their discretion in considering the best interests of the child, regardless of the marital status of the parents. And I think that's majority of the cases that I deal with, is that I have men and women, let me just go so far as to say that, men and women that have just been misinformed. They don't even know that they have rights. I have dads who don't know that they have a right to access to their minor child. And when I say access, I don't mean access in the sense of, way back in the day where dad sees the child every second Saturday for 2 hours. That's not the case anymore. Our courts have moved towards co-parenting, where dad has to be very much involved. And when I say involved, I mean emotionally involved, I mean psychologically involved in the child's life. And on the flip side of that, mom is not aware of what the child's rights are in terms of maintenance. What can she do? What can't she do? And what sort of financial obligations does each parent carry?
Right. So I hear you say that because this field or this topic is so stigmatized, people are actually, not taking advantage of the rights that they do have.
Correct.
And the two, I think, words that stuck to me is you said maintenance and access. Yes. And I think those are things that we're going to unpack a little bit more. And I'm assuming maintenance comes more from the females, and the access part, more the males are suffering with that.
Well, yes, so we're going to generalize. And, we're generalizing. When I talk about this on any platform, I get attacked because people say, oh, it's not always the mom that's claiming maintenance. Sometimes the children are the ones that are living with dad, and dad needs to claim maintenance. For the purpose of the discussion, we're going to say that maintenance is generally, the maintenance application for the child is brought on behalf of mom, and dad is usually the one that requires access. The biggest misconception here is that those two rights are linked or interchangeable, which is the furthest thing from the truth. Child maintenance, is actually the right of the child. Okay. So I know that may sound a bit strange, but mom is really only bringing the application for the maintenance on behalf of the minor child. In terms of the Children's Act, a child has the right to be financially maintained by both their parents, right? But in order to bring an application, you'd need to be over the age of 18. So the only way a child can bring an application to court is through mom. Right. Insofar as access is concerned, dad is bringing an application to gain access to his child and to gain some form of contact. I see that a lot of people believe that if dad's not paying maintenance, then I don't need to get him, then he doesn't need to see the child, or I can withhold the child from him, which is illegal. And on the flip side of that, dad feels that, well, if I'm not seeing the child, then I don't need to pay maintenance. Again, completely incorrect. The two are not interchangeable. They are rights that exist independent to each other, and both can be enforced whether or not, I'm going to say corresponding right, but it's not a corresponding right, that the rights of the other parents. So, for example, if dad is not paying maintenance, let's say he can't afford it and he's just trying to be nasty, which does happen, unfortunately, you have no right to withhold that child. You may want to do so, but it's not. And legally, that's not something that will be tolerated by our courts.
I think that's this topic, that access and maintenance are such separate issues. When children get pulled into this, maybe even unconsciously by the parents, and they bear the repercussions of it. And, just to unpack a little bit of the maintenance issue, and we will go to access as well. You mentioned, and I know according to the Children's Act, children have a right to the maintenance by whichever parent, but they need to be, given that financial support.
Yes.
And I know you informed me about this. I was totally ignorant. Tell me about spousal maintenance.
Okay, so this is where, again, I feel people get misinformed. And a lot of ex-husbands or ex-spouses believe, oh, she's suing me for maintenance for herself to help her raise the child. That's not true. right? There is something that's called spousal maintenance, which for example, a woman who was a stay-at-home wife, she can claim that from her ex-husband. She can claim spousal maintenance. And then there's something that's called child maintenance. And the child maintenance is essentially what it says. It's maintenance for the minor child. Stuff that's included in maintenance is, your living expenses, rental, petrol to drive the child to and from school. And of course, over and above the maintenance, we talk about parental obligations in terms of medical aid, in terms of schooling. So, so that obviously from my description that I've given you, you can see that spousal maintenance would not fall anywhere under the ambit of child maintenance. In fact, it's ruled by different areas of law altogether, and people use it interchangeably. And again, I think it's just from being misinformed.
Okay. So, out of curiosity again, we said Islamic marriages are not legally recognized. Is that true?
Insofar as our legislation goes, so we have the Marriages Act and we have the Divorce Act. Those are the two areas of legislation that would be applicable to us if you were to any married person who then wanted to get a divorce. The difficulty is that the definition of marriage in terms of the Marriages Act does not include Muslim marriages. Now, I've spoken about Muslim marriages on various other platforms. I've been on talk shows. I've been on SABC3 as well. And we sort of dived into this. That does not mean that Muslim marriages are totally, that there's no recourse available for Muslim spouses that are divorcing. It does mean that it's more complex. It does mean that there's a certain amount of legalities and implications that would come from that, but it's not dead in the water as people used to believe that it is. But I think, Nazia, that's a topic for a whole other day.
I'm bracing myself because there's so many questions coming up with that. Okay, let's move it to another line, right?
Okay.
Let's talk about access, because I think it's not fair. It's easy, and as being women, sometimes we can be a little bit biased, and we go for women empowerment and we go towards the women's side. It's natural, but we're very aware of it. And I think that the other side of it is there are lots of fathers out there who say, you know what, I want access to my child. I'm not seeing my child as much as I would want to. And I see them almost tormented in this. And it's unfair to not speak or let their voice be heard as well. So tell me about, the rights of the father.
Right. So funny enough, Nazia, I was having this discussion with my husband the other night, and I said to him, how do you tell a dad who has been seeing his child every single day? I mean, dads come home, we have dinner together, maybe we'll sit down and, do homework, and a dad that's been really involved with his child's life. How do you turn around then and say to him, okay, you can see your child every second weekend for an hour? How does that even sound fair to anybody on any level? And I understand that traditionally that may have been the case, but then we need to understand that traditionally, perhaps, dads weren't as involved as they are now in their kids' lives. Nowadays, dads pick their kids up from school. They take their kids to the park. Dads have become very involved in the children's lives. And the thing that people seem to be missing in this, and I hear what you say, that moms start getting, and naturally so, it's an emotional thing to go through. Perhaps at times mums, maybe if the maintenance is not being paid or dad's being a little bit difficult, then she tries to be a little bit difficult in return, while then you aren't allowed to see the child. And what happens is that children end up being used as pawns in this game, being pulled from one side to the other. And you may think, oh, the kids don't know, or I don't discuss these things with my children. Look, you don't need to discuss it. Believe me, the kid knows.
They feel it. Yeah.
They know, they see it. I mean, and like the example that I used, if you're seeing dad every single day and you're having dinner with dad every day and suddenly he's not there, that in itself is going to affect the child. And you may not be going to the child and saying, oh, your father is not paying me maintenance. But, you may have discussed that issue with your mom and the child may be in the room. And now you've created this idea in the child's mind that dad is bad. daddy's not paying mom maintenance. Or maybe you walk into the store, and actually a friend of mine said this to me. Her husband picked up her son and he wasn't paying maintenance, and we were in a massive legal battle trying to get some maintenance from him. And he took the child out and he bought him a very expensive, I don't know, it was some novelty soccer ball or something to that effect. And the son walked through the door, and mom was upset, and I don't blame her, but at least she admitted that it was not cool what she did. Her son walks through the door, and mom said, "Oh, what's that?" And she said, "Oh, daddy bought me this really expensive soccer ball." And he was so excited. And she turned to him and she said, "Oh, well, maybe you should eat that for dinner." Shame. She felt awful about what she said, and she did apologize to her son. But I think that's the kind of stuff that's happening. Is we don't realize we're not deliberately trying to drag our kids into it. We're not deliberately trying to hurt our children. I don't think anyone's trying to hurt their kids deliberately. But unfortunately, this kind of situation sometimes lends to the fact that the children get brought in, sometimes unintentionally.
Yeah, I totally hear you. I know in my practice as well, you feel absolutely so terrible for the children, because without realizing, I don't think any parent goes there, "Hey, let me hurt my child today," or "let me use them." I don't think they even realize that they are using them in passing messages to each other, because guess what? It's so hard, to speak to that spouse. Everything kind of breaks down, and the way the messages are passed are through the child. And the finances of it is also quite a heavy topic to go into, because a child sometimes doesn't understand, okay, I can't afford this, mommy says we can't have this, we have to take things out of the basket. She becomes the bad guy.
Yes.
And then they see, we're being general here, we're just using these terms, it's interchangeable. And then the father comes and he probably sees the child once in a while, he wants to give the child everything, and he buys that little bit extra, and then mom gets upset. So it's totally understandable. And also I wonder, legally, when is the child's voice heard? When you see in the movies the children are questioned, I wonder if it's even like that. Is the child's voice heard, or opinion heard, when we're asking for custody? Or
well, Nazia, yes, and I'm going to say fortunately and unfortunately for that. I'm not big on legal battles involving children. The only time I would really encourage my client to take the matter all the way, battle it or see it through to the end, is when we have cases of severe abuse, perhaps drug addiction. That's the only time that I really recommend litigation, high court litigation or some sort of fight for access. Most of the time, and I can say this, like 95% of the cases that I see, I always try to call the parents together, sit down, mediate, let's discuss this, and let's see if we can come to some sort of conclusion. Because to answer your question, yes, the child can be called to court.
Is there no age to that?
There is an age limit, and age limit, and not only age limit, but maturity of the child as well. As you know, our kids seem to be maturing much faster. I know. My 3-year-old sometimes gives me a run for my money. So I don't think it's age so much as it is maturity. That some of these children are brought to court and asked to give evidence and asked to say, where would you like to live? And prior to that, they may be called into the family advocates rooms to, and all parties will be interviewed. For me, I just feel that's such a horrible situation to put a child into, sort of making them stand up there, okay, choose mom or dad. It's not done as bluntly as that, but I mean, essentially, really, what are we asking the kid?
I hear you. So maybe the age or the maturity level, it's too much to put on those little shoulders.
At any age. How old are we right now? If I asked you to choose between mom and dad, nonetheless, it doesn't matter the age that you're at, just asking any child,
each
any
one
person,
has strengths and weaknesses.
Yes, any person, to tell them, okay, decide, what would you like? Who do you want, your mother or your father? I don't think any of us would be able to make that decision regardless of our age or maturity levels. And I don't think any human being should be put in that position to say, tell us who would you prefer to live with. Essentially, yes. I mean, if you're going to fight to have primary residence of the child, unfortunately, that's essentially what's going to happen. If the child is old enough, the child's say will be taken into consideration to the court, and yes, the child will have to stand up and say, I would prefer to live with my mom, for example. Okay. For me, that's going to put a huge impact on that child psychologically, and something I try to avoid in my practice as far as possible.
Okay, so I think I watch too many movies. I think maybe custody battles are common, and from what I hear you say, you try to do mediation, and most of what you see after the mediation case is not the custody battles.
Yes,
is that
and again, correct. And here's the thing again about the problem with our community is you're not the only one that watches too much TV, too much Ally McBeal, too much of Law and Order. And so what happens is, it's a double-edged sword. One is that there's this misconception that if I'm going to an attorney, that means I'm going to fight you and I'm going to take your money and I'm going to, which is not really the case. I mean, it shocks me every single day. If you run a business, you would go to your attorney, you and your business partners would sit down around a table, you would negotiate, and then you would say, please put this in writing. Because, as much as we trust each other, we're taught to tie our camel. So, you would obviously put it in writing, and no one's going to get offended by that. I mean, Nazia, if you and I went into a business together and I said, let's put it in writing, you would say, absolutely, put it in writing.
It's a contract that binds the both of us.
But the second you sort of flip that and bring it to family law and you think, let's get a settlement agreement together, let's get a parenting plan, let's make this an order of court, suddenly everybody feels very offended that you're going to an attorney. You don't trust me, and you think I'm going to, take the children and run overseas. And look, that does happen as well. But for the most part, no one's trying to do anyone down. And again, we've got this idea that the attorneys are bad and they're gonna, we're gonna sue you. And I contacted a divorce lawyer, and there's all these.
I wish you could see her expressions, guys. You should tape this. There's a finger wagging around just to let you know.
I'm used to
Sorry, I had to do that.
but yeah, so that's where it comes from, is that we watch too much of TV, unfortunately. And in reality, look, not to say that litigation doesn't happen. It does happen on a massive scale. And, there's lots of lots of high court applications and lots of court appearances, and most of my life I spend in court because of family law. There's always something or the other happening, some dramatic something or the other happening. But my point is that what I try to do at inception is sit down around a table, whether dad has an attorney and mom has an attorney, or whether you both want to come sit down before we instruct. If you want to come to me as a mediator instead of in my capacity as an attorney, sit down and say, okay, this is what the proposal we've come to, and can we put this in writing? And can we then have this made an order of court? Remember, the order of court is protecting who, essentially? The child.
The best interest of the child.
Yes, right. and we need to get out of this mindset that these things are, it's mom against dad and it's dad against. If we all just sit down together and at day one, we sit down and we say, what is in the best interest of the child? And a round table meeting, I feel for me, that's crucial. Sending settlement agreements and parenting plans up and down, again, it creates a barrier and it creates a wall, and we generally miss the point. So yeah, that's.
I hear you. Like from a psychological perspective, you have two people that love each other and get into the marriage, and emotions run very high when it's time to separate and divorce. And I think in all of that, the best interest of the child sometimes is not actually what drives people.
Correct.
And I don't blame them. I'm not condoning it. I don't blame them. Emotions sometimes, makes us do things that in a reasonable state we wouldn't do.
Correct.
And, talking about putting pen to paper, I usually recommend this, but now that I have you, I can get, the nitty gritty of it. You mentioned the parenting plan. And I'm assuming that takes a lot of time out from the arbitration process, so it's part of it.
It is.
What exactly is the parenting plan, and what would go into it?
Okay, so I love parenting plans. I think traditionally, maybe most of the viewers would know something called the settlement agreement. Now, a settlement agreement traditionally would basically talk about access. So what kind of access would dad have? Like I mentioned, he can see the kids for 1 hour every 2 weeks, and mom will keep the kids and he'll pay maintenance of X amount, and school fees will be paid in this particular way. A parenting plan is so much more detailed and so much more user-friendly. A parenting plan goes into minute details about the child. So we can even talk about grandparents. I mean, people seem to miss the point that, these children are my kids as well. My kids are, attached to my mom 24 hours a day. And people seem to forget that just because you're divorcing, the kids are not divorcing their grandparents. So the parenting plan takes into account things like extended family, aunts and uncles. Do they have access to the child? What kind of access do they have? It takes into consideration, or it documents things like, what religion will the child follow? And that may be something that's obvious to most of us, but sometimes we have a situation where perhaps mom was not Muslim at the time, and dad was, and perhaps there is some concerns regarding religion. So the parenting plan can set out and say, we've agreed that the religion the child will follow will be Islam. This is the type of school that the child will go to. It can even go insofar as to say what happens to the report. So, for example, mom is the primary caregiver, so she collects the report. How does dad get a copy of that? You'd be surprised. Something as silly as a report ends up being a huge dispute between parents. You didn't send me a copy, and then the school somehow has to play mediator to these things. So the parenting plan, to put it simply, is basically, how are we as two separate homes going to raise this child? And it takes into consideration so much more than just access and maintenance. It takes into consideration, okay, and for example, on traveling, are the children allowed to travel? To what extent? And, we can also document certain things in relation to travel. So the parenting plan, I can't give you, it's not a one-word answer. It depends on the family, it depends on the situation, but it just really goes into so much more detail on how these children are going to be raised going forward. And if you sit down with a mediator or with an attorney, these kinds of things can be discussed, and things you may not think of at the time, because like you said, you're emotional, you're upset, you're angry, but sitting down with a neutral party will be able to say, you guys, have you thought about this? What are you going to do if the child gets sick? Does dad get a phone call? Are you going to phone him and say the child is sick, or the child's been admitted to hospital? Please come. Please tell your parents to come. If you don't have, and it may sound obvious, but believe me, it's the furthest thing from obvious for so many people.
Right. And I'm listening to you, and I'm glad you actually dealt with that. That yes, it sounds totally comprehensive, but at that time, you don't know the issues that you're going to be facing. So it's a lot to also cover. And I do want to ask you more about this, but I think it's time for an ad break now. So we're going to pause again, and we'll catch up with you after the break. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. We have to apologize to you guys. We ended up chatting and didn't look that we did have some WhatsApp messages. So the first WhatsApp message is by a sister that inquired about, she wanted some advice on Sharia law. And I had a quick chat with Ayesha, and she's not really too comfortable with getting into that. Sister, I think it's best that you turn to Jamiyat for that kind of advice, are the ones to turn to. And then we have another question. The person would like to stay anonymous, and they want to ask Ayesha that the father of the child does not pay maintenance even for the most basic of things, and she wants to know what is the minimum maintenance amount that needs to be paid by the father, especially if the mother is not working.
Okay, so this is such a huge topic. Nazia, as you know, and you mentioned at the beginning, I am a huge advocate for child maintenance. I'm also legal advisor for child maintenance difficulties South Africa. I've been on the Afternoon Express on SABC3 discussing maintenance. It's such a huge topic. It's so close to my heart. So very quickly, how we establish maintenance for minor child is twofold. One, we first need to establish what are the needs of the child. Now, this is going to vary. If you're going to look at, for example, a particular household where children are attending private schools, where they have drivers at their disposal, and this is common, you may think it's not, but as in our community, it's very common. They're used to having things like Netflix, they're used to having DSTV, they eat, really extravagant meals, etc. So that's the first thing, is to consider the needs of the child and also the standard of living that the child has become accustomed to. Right. The second stage of the inquiry for maintenance would be the financial situation of both parents. Right. Now, as our sister has mentioned, she is unemployed. Therefore, that financial duty would be the dad.
Okay.
Right, she's unemployed. For various, I mean, that's a topic for another day. But essentially, the facts of the case remain that she's unemployed, and dad. About doing this, it's actually a lot more simple than most people realize. One, you could instruct a private attorney to assist you in this. Right. But then that begs the question, if I don't have maintenance to feed my child, how do I afford an attorney?
How do I access, yeah.
How do I afford an attorney? That's a relevant question. How do you even go about doing this? So the good news is that you don't need an attorney. You can approach the courts yourself. It's maintenance courts. So in Durban, so if you're living in the Durban area, you go down, it's on Somsey Road. You go into the court, you ask them for the maintenance court. They'll direct you. It's a self-help court, meaning there's going to be clerks in that court that are going to give you forms to fill out. So you're going to take all of your receipts. You're going to take, if you went to the doctor and you have to pay a doctor's account, you're going to take that. You're going to take your petrol receipts. You're going to take basically all of the expenses that you have had to cover in order to take care of this child. You're going to take it down to that court. It's quite a lengthy document that you need to fill out. You're going to fill out all of the child's details, what their needs are, what their requirements are, and proof. Proof is so important. So I know it sounds silly, but that's just the way law works. We work on evidence, and your only evidence you're going to have for maintenance to prove what the child needs is your receipts, basically. Your bank statements as well. So mom, in this particular case, would need to provide bank statements to prove she's not getting an income from somewhere. And again, please understand, the courts are not ignorant to the fact that unemployed, and we're going to put this in inverted commas, we could have people that are unemployed that are collecting huge checks from dad's estate or their parents' estate, or they could be living off massive properties and getting income. So it's not about being employed or unemployed, it's about your financial situation. So she'll need to give the court a copy of her bank statements and say, look, there's no money coming in here. And then dad would be ordered to pay. So is there a minimum amount? No. Is there a maximum amount? No. It would depend on the child, Nazia, a special needs child. As you would know, because I know you deal with this quite often, a special needs child, their financial needs are exorbitant. Right. And you cannot compare that to a child that doesn't perhaps have those kinds of difficulties. So first of all, we need to look at what is the child's needs. The age of the child would vary. Is the child in school? Does the child go to madrasa, for example? Sometimes even when mom is working, mom needs a caregiver to take care. You need to pay someone, a domestic worker,
And the life that they were accustomed to.
Yes.
To ask them to take a huge drop is
yes,
quite unfair to
of
the
course,
child.
the courts understand that, sometimes it's not possible to maintain the exact same financial lifestyle because now it's two households. But definitely you cannot take a child that's been used to, like I said, having drivers and going to private schools to living in, a tiny bachelor flat with no food and electricity that's being disconnected and no entertainment whatsoever. So this mom needs to get herself down to the maintenance court and take some action and get dad to. And so what will happen is she'll fill out those forms. Those forms will need to be served on dad via the sheriff.
And there's no cost to it, right? She needs to go down to the court.
Yeah, it's free. It's completely free. Or the police can serve it for her for free. And then dad comes to court. And then he needs to answer to the court, what's happening? Why aren't you paying for this child? Yeah. And he needs to come with his bank statements and so on.
Right. So Jazakallah, sister, for that call. I'm sure many also benefited from that information that we got from there. And I don't know where time has gone. We've come to the end of our segment. Ayesha, I think we've made this intent that inshallah every month or month and a half we will call Ayesha in because I don't think we did justice to the topic, and I'm sure there are many other questions that would want answering. So inshallah, let's look forward to that we'll see Ayesha soon. And she's thanking us for the response. Jazakallah to you for actually making that effort.
Ameen.
And sometimes benefit from it. So Jazakallah,
Correct,
sister. Yeah. I feel like I'm talking very fast now. But to summarize, from a psychological perspective, it has been found that, we can't assume the worst. The common predictors of children's well-being after divorce is also, their personality, the parenting plan, the parents' emotional state, how they are coping, and, if they can have continuity of the way life was, that would be best for the child to adjust to the situation. Thank you, Ayesha, for making time to come onto this show. And, I wanted to always end up with the thought of the day. I'm going to go as fast as I can. I thought about the poem of Khalil Gibran. I'll only read one stanza. I just love this poem. I can't leave without saying it. And I think it really sums up the idea that we were trying to get through today. And it goes something like this. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. Jazakallah khair.
Brilliant.
Remember, be kind, be mindful, and enjoy the rest of your week. Ma salam.